This is the story of my brief friendship with a guy that damn near stalked me, and I'm sharing it for some closure, I think. I started my freshman year of college at a university in my hometown that's pretty nice. I'm not going to share too much about it, but it has a smaller amount of students. Enough that you don't really run into people too often, actually. I lived on campus and was only 17 at the time. I had a Tinder, of course, as I was fresh out of a relationship and looking to experience new things in college. I matched with this one boy, Asher, who seemed nice enough at first. Pretty socially awkward, but I never really minded that sort of thing. I have some anxiety issues myself, so I'm pretty sympathetic to it. Because of that, I ignored a lot of warning signs I probably shouldn't have. We texted for a while, and he seemed really nice and caring. He wanted to know a lot about me, which I wasn't too keen on sharing. I told him the basics, and we texted pretty regularly though. He lived on campus as well, and invited me to hang out. At the time, things didn't seem sketchy at all, so of course I was completely down. When I first met him though, that's when things started to get a bit uncomfortable. We hung out in his dorm at first, which was pretty standard overall. I got cozy with him on his couch. I'd say cuddling, but not quite there. When we started talking more though, I realized that something was a bit off. He kept making comments that would just put me off right away. I tried to ignore them though. Things like, "I've never cuddled with anyone before, sorry if I'm doing this wrong." So many comments about how he wanted me to stay forever. Weird word choice, but whatever. He was just trying to do his own thing. I'd let him down easy. I ended that hangout pretty quickly for some fake excuse and went right back to my room. He kept on texting me and professing how much he was into me. I told him sorry, but I'm not really looking for any kind of relationship. I didn't want things to be romantic. It was a bad lie, but I'm very non-confrontational and I didn't want to be mean. It's not like he had really done anything wrong, we just didn't really click. That's when things started to get really weird though. He immediately sent me this huge paragraph saying how it was okay if I didn't want a relationship right now. Instead, he'd wait for me as long as it took and save his virginity for me. We had never even talked about anything sexual. I had never even really told him I liked him or flirted back. I just never turned him down. Unfortunately, that was just the start of everything. He would not leave me alone after, even though I kept trying to de-escalate things. I would keep running into him all over campus and other places as well. I wasn't sure how he would always just suddenly manage to be nearby right when my classes ended. I also wasn't sure why we'd suddenly both be in the dining hall at the exact same time, even though I hadn't changed my regular routine at all. I tried to brush it off though. That was definitely a mistake. I ended up turning him down completely eventually, because now I was getting creeped out. I couldn't figure out how he wasn't getting what I was putting out, that I didn't want anything romantic with him. He started to really guilt trip me, telling me about how he was going to kill himself and nobody else would ever love him. I'd been in a manipulative relationship in the past, so I recognized that behavior right away and shut it down. I told him I couldn't even be friends with him if he was gonna say stuff like that. In my head, that was that. He actually didn't reply for a while, but when he did once more, all hell broke loose. I was luckily out of town at the time for a concert, so that made me feel a lot better. He immediately went off though, paragraph after paragraph about how horrible a person I was. I was such a slut. He needed to put me in my place. All the regular nice guy things you could think of. I could handle that much though. I just ignored all his nasty words. It seemed though, once the regret set in from him saying all those things, he made it his mission in life to win me over however possible. He apologized profusely, told me he could not stand being all alone, and I was his only friend in the world. Whatever, terrible, but at the moment I didn't really care about that. To prove his dedication to me though, he did the creepiest thing yet. First, he texted me he was outside my room right now. We did not live in the same dorm building, and you can't get into the buildings unless you live there. I don't know how he got in. At the moment, I was not there, and my roommate was also not home, so at least that much was okay. I texted back at that point and told him to leave. Just how creepy that shit was. He pulled out his last resort. He sent me screenshots of my contact in his phone. On Apple devices, you can fill in tons of information and even have a notes section as well. I could see everything was full. He somehow knew my home address, my room number on campus, my parents' and brothers' names, my pets' nicknames, my whole schedule. It was terrifying because I'm a very private person. The only social media I have is my Instagram, and I've never shared a single thing on it about that kind of stuff. I don't think I'll ever find out how he discovered all of this about me. I blocked him on everything right away and reported him to the school as well. Of course, the school did nothing at all. I still see him around on campus and other places as well, and he still tries to approach me whenever he manages to see me. I always duck and run away as fast as possible, and that's worked for me so far. It's terrifying, though, to think what he might do one day. I was a new manager of a very old building at the time. I came from social work and was hired to manage a building that was about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. My office was down in the basement, along with several below-ground apartments as well. Of these apartments, there was an elderly fellow I knew who was on palliative care for extreme kidney failure. He would get medication and food delivered every other week or so. So when it wasn't brought in once, I rang him in. When I got no answer, I asked the police for a welfare check on the man. This was a very warm June. The way the building was constructed, you couldn't smell something wafting out of an apartment unless the door was opened and allowed the smell out. Once the police opened the door, everyone knew he must have been dead for a long time. The smell absolutely permeated everything. The smell of rotten human got sucked into the air ducts, and it was not something you would ever forget. Fast forward 1 month now to July. Now mind you, there are 105 tenants in this 4-story building. I get a call from one tenant's niece that she hasn't heard from her uncle in a while. Could we please check on him and make sure he was okay? Of course, I knew this guy. I'd just pop up and make sure he was okay real quick and we'd have a good laugh together. No answer. I called the police for a welfare check once again. It had been a steady 85 degrees outside for a few weeks, and yes, he had sadly passed away. The smell of a dead human is so much different than the smell of other dead things. It's like a sticky, sweet smell combined with an acrid taste, and a heavy, I don't really know how to describe it, perhaps a dead meat, mushroom sort of smell? It doesn't smell like other rotten stuff. The ME made a joke about me staging this just to see him again. The smell was so bad in the hallway just from opening the door for that few minutes to take the body out. I had entire families fleeing from the building in tears. I knew I had to do something to mitigate this crap. I knew he had passed on a small carpet in the middle of the room, so I put some methanol under my nostrils, double gloved up, wrapped up my pants legs, and pulled the carpet that was pretty thick with adipose tissue. I had told the coroner what was going on before I did this. I slipped in his goo. I double-bagged his carpet and opened the windows. It's rough to think about it. It involved large fans and my staying up all night. Cut to 1 month later now. I'm putting in notices on doors for an upcoming bedbug inspection. Immediately, I smelled that smell as I passed by the 4th floor. That acrid, dead smell. Someone was deceased. There's no mistaking it at this point. I started knocking on doors. Only one of about 25 answered because it was in the middle of the day. It's not like I can just bust into their apartment and go check. I called the police and they came out and confirmed it was definitely a dead body, but nobody could figure out where it was coming from. I stood there trying to figure out if a dead body constituted an emergency so I could circumvent that 48-hour rule of entering an apartment. The police also told me that without something else, they couldn't start busting down doors either. We walked up and down the halls and just could not figure out where this dead smell of a body was coming from. I went to my office to print up 48-hour notices of intent to enter. I laid down in my bed that night and started thinking about it. The smell of a dead body had only entered the hallway when the door was opened. Someone had the smell in there and had opened a door. Someone had opened a door. Day of, I go apartment to apartment. 10 apartments in, and this white-haired, middle-aged dude answers the door. Immediately, I can smell huge wafts of bleach coming from his apartment. Instead of hanging out like most people would do when someone is inspecting your apartment, he immediately took off running. The floor had been fully bleached. The kitchen had been fully bleached. The entire apartment was spotless. The neighbors later said that he told people that some chicken had gone bad, but I know that chicken does not smell like that. I contacted the non-emergency line that day, but without anything else to go on, there wasn't a lot they could do, unfortunately. In the end, that guy got away. This happened to me just last night, and I'm left still feeling pretty uncomfortable about the entire exchange. Before I jump into this, I'll give you a little bit of background and context. I work with a guy named Mike who's about 2 years older than me. Shortly after meeting Mike, he friended me on Facebook. I accepted because I wanted to avoid any awkwardness at work, and I didn't really use it that often anyway. Mike would often send me weird messages that were completely out of the blue and all unrelated to each other. Nothing particularly creepy though, or even worthwhile discussing. I figured he just wanted an excuse to talk or perhaps make a friend, so I did my best to give him the hint that I wasn't interested, without being too rude. I would respond with one-word answers days later, or even not at all. I'd also bring up the fact I had a boyfriend fairly frequently, whenever he spoke with me both online and in person. Honestly though, it hadn't really been a huge deal up until this point, just more of a mild annoyance that I mostly didn't think about. I started to realize from my experiences with him at work that he may just have an issue with social interactions. That led me to believe that he was even more mild than I'd previously thought he was. He had a hard time picking up on sarcasm or body language, and usually started conversations by bringing up the exact same topics over and over. Most of our conversations in person involved him asking a series of questions I'd answer out of politeness, followed by an awkward silence I usually felt forced to end by asking, "And you?" Anyway, last night I was working. He came to visit unprompted once again from a different floor, later in the evening when most of the residents were already in bed. We're both PCAs, by the way. Everything started up the same way. "Have you seen any good movies lately? Do you like to drive fast? I've seen you speeding in your brand name of my car after work. Do you drink? You like to go to the beach?" I was only half paying attention because I was doing paperwork. I tried to make it pretty clear I was busy. I wasn't too interested in an interrogation at the moment. Then though, he leaned in and asked me, "Have you ever killed a hog?" I thought I heard him ask wrong, so again I asked, "What?" I turned to look at him. I said, "Have you ever killed a hog?" I laughed a little awkwardly. What an unexpected and weird question. No? He just stood there smiling, and because it was so awkward, I eventually had to ask, "Have you?" He laughed hysterically and said, "Yeah." This left me weirded out. "Well, why did you do that?" He looked at me extremely confused. "What do you mean, why?" "Well, why did you kill that hog, dude?" He continued to laugh. "So what, you just went out and killed a pig for no reason?" No, it was for a function." I let out an uncomfortable laugh of relief, but before things could go back to normal, he hit me with a sucker punch. Yeah, I was the one that got to kill it. I got to see it beg for its life while I slit its throat. At this point, I was completely shocked. I was creeped out and a little worried no one else was around right now. I knew enough about him to know this was not a joke. Dude, why would you say it like that? He laughed even more. I watched it beg for its life, and then I slit its throat open. Dude, stop, seriously. He smiled at me and I started to ignore him now. I texted my boyfriend because that was pretty thoroughly disturbing. It was quiet for a few moments. Yeah, it took a long time to bleed out too. Much longer than the other animals I killed. A lot more blood, I think. Mike, stop. I thought you liked horror movies. Come on. Yeah, I do, but this is creepy and you're making me uncomfortable. Mike started to linger, repeating these same creepy statements every once in a while. Now, I was fully ignoring him though. Finally, he stopped, and then again out of the blue, "Do you have an Instagram maybe?" Even though I was pissed, I was more than a little relieved at this change of topic. I responded with a very rude and angry, "Yeah, I do." At that point, he simply shrugged and walked away. I wish that was the end of it, because as if I was not freaked out enough, 10 minutes later, the phone at the desk rings. I, thinking it's a resident's family member as usual, answer. But no, it's Mike calling from his floor. "Hey, do you want to go out to eat octopus later maybe?" I was completely done with this dude because I was angry. "No, leave me alone." I hear him do a little snicker. "Okay, how about pork then?" I tell him a resident needs me and hang up, busy relaying the story to others over text, when finally my coworker on my floor for the night makes an appearance. We were sitting there together, but I refrained from telling him what just happened because he was a lot older. Maybe he might think it's funny or misunderstand and be friends with Mike. The phone rings again 10 minutes later. I ask my coworker to answer the phone this time. It's Mike again, and I can tell by the side of the conversation I can hear he was looking to speak with me. He asked about the resident I said I needed to help. My coworker didn't know about the problem and jokingly told him to come down and hang out with us. Before I could make any sort of gesture to say no, my coworker turned to me and said, "Mike wants to know your favorite type of food so he can bring you some." This guy was relentless. I told my coworker I didn't want him to come. He relayed the message before hanging up a few seconds later. The phone rang again before we left, but this time, thankfully, it wasn't him. I was a little bit worried about walking to my car at this point. I was super weirded out, and he already made it clear he knew exactly which one was mine. I called my friend to talk to me as I walked through the dark parking lot, but thankfully Mike did not make an appearance there, and I got home okay in the end. Maybe it was an overreaction on my part, but the whole thing creeped me out. I'm honestly pretty worried about the next time I'll have to work a shift with him. I grew up in a very safe, very affluent neighborhood. It was unheard of for anyone to lock their cars or houses, and whenever someone new moved into the neighborhood, it was only mere moments before they were welcomed with open arms and open doors. Despite being surrounded by what could be described as one large neighborhood family, my mom was very particular about house rules being followed, one of which was never going out alone. Walking over to a friend's house, 3 of us need to go together, so 2 could walk home together after dropping everyone off. It was rare, but occasionally just 2 of us would be able to sneak out from under her watchful eye and run to the corner store a few blocks down for some candy or soda. One sweltering day during the summer I turned 9, I found myself home alone and extremely restless. I decided to take my sister's cool new 10-speed for a spin around the block a few times. Now, even though I was tall for my age, this bike was still a few inches too big for me. I decided that didn't matter though. I jumped on and started pedaling away. My first lap around the neighborhood went off without a hitch. The birds were chirping, the sun was shining, the wind was blowing through my curled hair and felt wonderful. The second lap around the block, though, I passed an older, unfamiliar car parked by the side of the road. The sun reflected off the huge scrape down the side, temporarily shocking my vision into bright blue stripes. I furiously tried to blink them away while I almost fell. On the third lap around, I saw this car pull off the side of the road, now heading towards me. A tiny pit of unease began to grow in my stomach as the driver slowed when he passed me by. I chalked it up to just being scared of getting caught out alone and continued on my way. I picked up speed as I rounded the corner toward my house and decided to go for one more time around the block. I'd have to make it quick though to beat my mom home and avoid the trouble I knew I'd be in if she caught me out there. I hit the bottom of the hill next to our house with some speed and started to climb to the top, slowing more and more the closer I got. By the time I actually reached the summit, I had to stop and catch my breath, teetering the too-tall bike at my hip. As I stood there struggling to catch my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck immediately stood up. My arms locked on the handlebars, and every inch of my body froze. I had been caught. I just knew it. I could hear a car creeping up behind me. It just had to be my mom. Only it wasn't. When relief should have washed over me, that unknown dread only deepened, further stiffening my frozen limbs. I turned around to see that same old car with the same blinding scratch down the side, slowing down right next to me. The man stopped that car next to my bike on the wrong side of the street, and through his opening driver door, started to ask me if I had seen a stray dog running about. He had come off of his leash and run off on his own. I froze. This was the cliché question they had warned us about in school so many times, the one every kidnapper supposedly uses. I decided if I answered him firmly and rode my bike away, he would know this simple plan would not work on me. Plus, he might just really be looking for his dog. This was my plan, at least. My terrified little body betrayed that plan, and a trembling "No" is all I could manage. I fumbled my feet to the pedals of this bike that was too large for me, and his door flew open. He lunged out toward me. "No, leave me alone," I said as I wobbled my way past his open car door, his hand brushing the back of my shirt and knocking my back tire. I pedaled as fast as I could the 50 feet into the next driveway I saw. I pedaled legs burning up the drive, running my front tire so hard into my neighbor's front step that it bent the wheel entirely. My body catapulted over the handlebars, and I burst through my neighbor's front door. Eddie, help me!" My neighbor was not home, though. I ran into the kitchen, still calling in hopes I was wrong. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "And what do you think you're doing?" I froze. I heard my heartbeat in my ears, feeling the blood pumping through my veins. I knew this was it for me. I slowly turned around, not knowing what else to do. Only there stood my neighbor's son, home from college early. I dissolved into tears, gulping out what happened. He tossed the bent bike into the back of his truck and drove me around the corner to the safety of home. My mom was home and had the look of death in her eyes until she saw the tears streaming down my face. The police were immediately called. The neighbors were called as well. The car had been spotted frantically circling the block the few minutes following our encounter, but he was long gone by the time the police arrived. To this day, 20 years later, I still have a hard time riding my bike alone. I still get chills when cars slow down next to me. I still wonder if the next girl that guy attacked was as lucky as I was. This happened to me when I was about 18 years old. I was big into running back then and lived in a town that was a suburb but had big swaths of farmland, as in smallish tomato and strawberry fields, not huge never-ending fields of wheat or anything like that. I preferred running on the dirt at the edges of these fields. It was a lot easier on my legs than running long distances on concrete or asphalt at least. I was usually training for half marathons at the time, 13.1 miles for those who aren't insane enough to believe running is fun. This particular day, I was planning to run an easy 6 miles. I told my mom and she suggested I do a loop, then meet them at the dog park, about 3 miles away from our house, as my halfway point. This was pre-cell phone area, when all the craziest shit seemed to go down. Being careful, I took a walkie-talkie my dad always used, and my mom took the other one. Now, the walkie-talkie had a range longer than the ones my brother and I played around with when we were younger. Even still, it would definitely not work 3 miles away. Honestly, I had no idea what the exact range was. So, I take off on my run. I'm planning to go on the sidewalk for a bit until I get to those fields. I think they were lettuce fields back then. I'm not sure, but they were short, small plants. I was running in the dirt with the road a few yards to my left. I have to run south, then turn right onto a slightly smaller, less traveled road to get to that dog park. As I'm running on the first dirt part, my parents drive by and, being dorks, they honk, wave, and yell at me. I waved and soon after made my turn onto the smaller road. This is one road. Me on flat dirt, small drainage ditch by my side, forever field of lettuce all around me, then a wall that was the backyard of some houses. I started noticing how quiet this street was and just how few cars were passing by now. At that moment, I randomly started thinking to myself, if someone tried to do something, I could run over to those houses. No, they're so far away, I'd never make it in time. Then I hear a car, but this one doesn't pass me by like all the others. I hear it slow down behind me, just out of my peripheral vision. My senses go super alert, and I immediately realize what a dumbass I was to pick this route. Now I'm stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, with no one to help me and nowhere to hide. The car starts speeding enough so that it's right next to me. I glance over to see a man, middle-aged, white-haired, totally normal looking, but immediately I get a chill down my spine. He leans over into the passenger seat and says in a super sweet voice, "Hi there, where you going? You need a ride?" I was scared. I realized this was not good. Admittedly, nothing had happened yet. He could totally innocently be just wanting to chat, but my intuition was in overdrive, telling me this man was a danger. I hopped over the ditch, thinking that would at least make it harder for his car to follow me if I needed to take off across the field to try and make it to those houses in the distance. That pissed him off apparently. He gunned it, got closer to the ditch, and in front of where I was, said in a voice I can only describe as a bone-chilling evil, "You know, you shouldn't be out here all alone. Something horrible could happen to you, you know, and no one would ever know where to find you." He put his car in park and took off his seatbelt. I remembered that walkie-talkie in that moment. The piece of crap was all static because it was too far away. I immediately turned down the volume so he couldn't hear. "Hey, Dad, yeah, I see your car over there. I'm over here by this red Buick. Do you see me?" I fake waved over to no one. There was no car coming from the direction my parents were. When I started talking, there was no one behind us either. But by the grace of the universe, in that exact moment a car turned down onto that road. The man saw it, looked at me, and sped off so fast he left skid marks on the pavement. I'd never run faster in my life. I was looking behind me every few seconds and thought he'd be waiting for me at every intersection I had to cross. I was shaking and scared and relieved when I got to that goddamn dog park. I told my parents everything, and my mom called the cops right away. They took a statement, but said it would help if something actually happened to someone else. The weird part was, I was having trouble getting my story out because I was so upset. Before I even gave a description of the car, the cop asked me, "Was it a red Buick by chance?" He wouldn't tell us why he said that, but that just added to my feeling I had narrowly escaped something awful. This happened yesterday, and I still can't believe it happened at all. I'll explain it all at the end, so I'm sorry if it's confusing at first. I've recently moved into a new apartment, about 3 weeks ago. I'm sharing it with my sister. The only person we know properly is a single mom who lives in the apartment next to us. Ever since we moved in, she's always been giving us advice and helping us out with lots of things as well. We don't know any of our other neighbors properly yet though. Today, I was out with some friends, and after that I went to get my sister so we could go out together for some food. We got home at around 10 p.m. My sister and I got into our PJs and were sitting around watching TV when our buzzer rang. I jumped up to answer it. It turned out to be our neighbor, that nice single mom. I asked her what was up. She told me our dad was looking for us downstairs. Straight away, my stomach dropped. I immediately asked her if she's sure he said he was our dad. The reason I asked was just to make sure that's what she actually said. But then she replied, "Yeah, he said he was your dad and was looking for you." The neighbor asked me if she should let him up to our flat, but I told her no. I wanted to shout out to my sister, but I didn't want to worry her right away. I asked my neighbor to not let him come up yet, and I heard her go out and repeat this to him. I couldn't hear anything for a few minutes, and I started to get really worried. At this point, my sister came up to us and asked me who it was. I called out to my neighbor a few times, but she didn't answer. It must have only been about a minute, but it honestly felt like ages when she didn't reply. I was about to tell my sister to call 000. I was starting to panic, and I didn't know what was going on out there. The neighbor came back in and told me the man was gone. She then came up to our flat and explained what had gone down. She said that she was walking back after finishing her work, and she saw a man by the buzzers. At first, she assumed he was just someone who lived there, but when he noticed her walking up, he asked for us by name and asked if she could let him up to our flat. When she'd asked him who he was, he told her he was our dad. Obviously, she buzzed us and told us first, since our neighbor didn't know us well enough to know what our dad looked like. She said because we were young and on our own, she didn't want to just buzz a strange man up right away. Well, her mom instincts had kicked in when she heard me being hesitant to let him in. She said that apparently after he heard me say that, he got really pushy with her and started trying to shove her out of the way. He kept on saying over and over again, "It's okay, I'm their dad, let me in, I'm not going to do anything." She began to argue with him and told him that if I didn't feel comfortable letting him in, there was no way he was getting in. He then called her a bitch, got in the car, and drove away. Now, this is the reason why I hesitated. We haven't spoken to our dad since I was 16. We had even considered getting a restraining order from him at one point. He's not our biological father, but we were legally adopted by him when I was 9. He was extremely abusive. It was so bad, me, my sister, and my mom had to sneak out and leave him in the middle of the night. He was always really controlling, and after we left, he would secretly follow us around, leaving threatening mails on the phone. I found out he had a criminal record as well. I believe he was convicted of manslaughter in the 80s. I have no idea of the backstory behind that, and honestly, I don't really want to know. Like I said, we haven't heard from him since I was 16, which was 3 years ago, so as soon as she said the word dad, I almost had a panic attack. I asked her to describe the man. She said that because it was so dark out, she couldn't really see him very well. We ended up staying with her then, because me and my sister were really shaken up. I don't know whether to call the cops or not. I don't know if it's him or not either, as it could easily have been someone else pretending to be him.